Welcome back to Cinema Recaps. Today, I'll introduce you to a post-apocalyptic zombie movie from 2016 titled The Girl with All the Gifts. Spoilers ahead, so be careful and stay alert. Melanie is lying in bed when the lights in her cell come on. She gets up and starts preparing for school. Two soldiers enter, and she greets them happily. But the only thing they care about is securing her to the wheelchair. They push her out into the hallway, lining her up with other children like her. Melanie and the others are brought into a classroom, arranged by numbers. Melanie asks the teacher, Miss Justino, to tell them a story, and suggests she read a myth so it could count as history. The teacher reluctantly agrees and reads them the story of Pandora's box. After class, Melanie is taken back to her cell, where the two gruff soldiers refuse to say goodnight to her. Later she is given dinner, a plate full of worms. She eats as she drifts off to sleep. The next day, Melanie receives a visit from Dr. Caldwell. She had solved the riddle the doctor had given her, so the doctor gives her a new one, explaining that it's a logic problem. The doctor asks her to solve Schrodinger's cat problem. When Melanie can't answer, the doctor writes something down related to her behavior and reads it back to her, calling her a subject. Finally, the doctor asks Melanie for a number, and she replies with 13. Later, the soldiers once again take her and the other children to school. As Melanie is wheeled past the numbered cells, she notices that cell number 13 hasn't been opened. When they arrive in class, the seat marked with that number remains empty. The teacher decides to give them a writing assignment for that day's class, and the children are worried about not knowing what story to tell. Melanie is the only one who writes a longer story in her notebook, so when the teacher asks who wants to read out loud what they've written, she quickly raises her hand. She depicts herself as the savior and hero in her story. The teacher is moved by the story and approaches Melanie, wanting to touch her. Suddenly, Sergeant Parks bursts into the classroom and yells that touching the children is forbidden. He wants to remind Miss Justino why this rule exists, so he approaches one of the children, rolls up his sleeve, and brings his arm close to the child. The child sniffs him and unhinges its jaw, ready to bite. The other children mimic the same behavior. After class, Sergeant Parks walks into Melanie's cell as the others are about to remove her restraints. She provokes him, so he leaves her tied to the chair. That night, Miss Justino comes to visit Melanie and realizes that she has been left restrained. She enters the cell and begins untying her. Melanie catches the teacher's scent and starts to transform like the other children. Before Melanie fully changes, she tells the teacher to leave. Later that night, Dr. Caldwell visits her again. They talk, and the doctor asks the girl for another number. Melanie replies with the number 4, which matches her cell number. The next morning, Sergeant Parks arrives to take Melanie. He leads her out of the cell and into an elevator, then takes her out of the facility as gunfire echoes all around. Soldiers are running and shooting toward the military complex's fence. Melanie is confused by the scene as Parks pushes her to another part of the complex and takes her into a laboratory where Dr. Caldwell is waiting. She asks the girl about Schrodinger's cat, but when she doesn't get the answer she wants, she explains that the cat in the box is both alive and dead, just like Melanie. Another doctor injects a sedative into Melanie's arm, knocking her out instantly. They place her on a table and restrain her, but she quickly wakes up. Justino runs in and stops the doctor from cutting into Melanie. After some persuasive words, the teacher agrees to lower her weapon, but she is immediately pepper-sprayed, incapacitating her so the soldiers can arrest her. The doctor explains that she isn't just cutting Melanie up, but using her as a source for the vaccine. Justino is taken away as an alarm starts blaring. Caldwell orders another doctor to close the shutters, but as she does, a zombie breaks through the glass and viciously bites her. Caldwell kills the zombie but accidentally cuts her hand in the process. The other doctor starts to fully transform, but she manages to escape the lab just in time. Melanie is left alone in the room with the zombie, but it doesn't touch her. She grabs a scalpel and frees herself from the restraints. Melanie steps outside and sees complete chaos in the complex. Zombies are running everywhere, attacking soldiers as they try to shoot them down. Suddenly, she sees Justino being beaten by soldiers. In a fit of rage, Melanie rushes over, attacks, and bites them, eventually killing both before passing out. Justino wakes up to find Melanie beside her. She picks her up and carries her into a military vehicle. The zombies completely take over the complex as the vehicle drives away, followed by a horde of zombies. Some time later, the vehicle stops in the middle of nowhere. Parks and Kieran realize that Melanie is in the vehicle with them. Justino lets her out, but Caldwell screams that it's not her decision to make. Melanie runs a short distance away from the vehicle and stops, clearly seeing the outside world for the first time. The others stay by the vehicle, trying to contact the weather station but with no success. The doctor demands they bring her test subject back. Parks, Kieran and Caldwell check the vehicle for supplies but find no water or food, only a mask used to approach zombies. The sergeant makes a plan to head south to Beacon, assuming that everyone at the complex is dead except for the zombie children. They place Melanie in the gunner's seat of the vehicle, strap her in, and put on a mask before heading toward a river to collect water. When they arrive, a few zombies spot them, prompting a gunfight with the soldiers. One of the soldiers gets bitten during the battle, so Parks waits to see if he will turn. When the process begins, he shoots the soldier and closes the door to the vehicle. He realizes that Justino has brought Melanie along, which makes him extremely nervous. Melanie asks about the zombies, and Caldwell explains that they are people infected with a fungus that spreads through bites. When Parks tries to start the vehicle, he realizes it's broken, and they will have to walk through London, a quicker but more dangerous route. Parks and Kieran survey the surrounding area they need to cross, which is filled with zombies. They inform the others that there is no choice but to pass through the zombies to find shelter and supplies once they enter the city. The group walks through a sea of sleeping zombies, being careful not to wake them. Parks stops when they reach a dead end, where a zombie mother is pushing a baby stroller toward them. Caldwell approaches her and makes the zombie mother stop. She sees something moving in the stroller and checks it, only to find a rat inside. She screams, waking the zombie mother first and then the others. The group narrowly escapes and continues through the zombie-filled streets of the city, eventually finding an abandoned hospital and heading inside. Parks finds an opening to another floor, and the group climbs up to be safer. Parks, Justino and Kieran immediately go on patrol while Caldwell and Melanie stay behind. When they are alone, Melanie asks the doctor where she came from. The doctor explains that she and the other children like her were found in a maternity ward in the hospital. They were born to mothers who were infected with the fungus while pregnant, so the infection entered their bodies through the placenta. Caldwell tells her that they are different from the other zombies, with the ability to think and react almost like real humans. Later, Justino returned with new clothes she had found for Melanie and apologized for not finding any food. That night, Parks and Justino talked about Melanie, and he told her that the girl really loved her. Meanwhile, Kieran was watching over Melanie, and they also gradually started to bond. The next morning, they noticed more zombies gathering in front of the hospital. They had no way out, but Melanie came up with a plan. Since the zombies wouldn't attack her, she convinced the others to let her go outside and find a way to lure the zombies away from the building. Caldwell didn't like the plan, but with no alternative, the others agreed. Before leaving, Melanie asked to put on her new clothes. She went outside and easily passed by the zombies. Suddenly, she spotted a cat, hunted it down and ate it raw. After that, she went into a house and found a small dog. When she returned, she used the dog as bait to lure the zombies away from the hospital. Parks put Melanie's mask and handcuffs back on, and they continued their journey through the desolate city, heading toward Beacon. On the way, they saw something strange, fungus growing out of the zombies' bodies. Dr. Caldwell suggested that this was the next stage in the fungus's life cycle. She told Melanie that in her case, the fungus acted more like a symbiote rather than a parasite, unlike in others. As they went deeper into the city, they discovered a massive growth of bodies that had turned into a large fungus, which Caldwell suspected was the reason why there were no walking zombies around. When enough zombies gather together, they transition into the mature stage of the fungus, capable of spreading spores over a large area, possibly even globally. While continuing on their way, they unexpectedly found a mobile laboratory. The group entered the vehicle and began inspecting it. Parks tried to start the engine first, then the radio, but there was no response. Kieran went out to search for supplies, while Melanie began to feel uneasy, as if she was about to change. She said she needed to eat too, so they let her out to hunt. Melanie quickly found food and tore through it. After finishing her meal, she heard a strange sound and followed it to a bookstore. She peeked through a gap and saw a group of children communicating with grunts. Melanie realized they were like her. Suddenly, one of the children entered and told the others that he had smelled something. The whole group followed him outside. Meanwhile, in the mobile lab, Caldwell was getting sicker and informed Justina that she had sepsis. She began talking about Melanie again, saying that she needed the girl's brain and spinal cord to create a vaccine, which made Justina very uncomfortable. Suddenly, Melanie returned and told them about the children she had encountered, believing they would be hunting Kieran. At that moment, Kieran was walking down a street and unexpectedly found an unopened can on the ground. He continued finding more cans until he saw a store and crawled under the shutter to get inside. Once inside, he started eating and browsing through dirty magazines. A little girl appeared behind him, startling him. She lured him between the shelves, and then a group of other children appeared. When their leader joined them, they all attacked Kieran together. Meanwhile, Melanie was leading Parks and Justina to his location, as she could smell him just like the other children. Eventually, they arrived at the store, went inside, and found that Kieran had been almost entirely eaten. Melanie realized that the children hadn't just set a trap for Kieran, but for them as well. Hay went outside and saw that Melanie was right. The group of children was waiting for them. Melanie challenged the leader and fought him. When she killed him, it proved to the other children that she was the strongest. Because of that, she was able to protect Parks and Justina, then led them back to safety. They arrived at the lab and found that the door was open. When they stepped inside, Caldwell sedated them with some kind of gas. She pulled Melanie toward the table to perform her procedure, but stopped because of the terrible pain in her hand. She turned around for a moment to deal with her wound, but when she turned back, Melanie was already awake and alert. They talked, and Caldwell tried to convince the girl to sacrifice herself so that she could save everyone with her vaccine. Melanie almost agreed, but asked one final question. She wanted to know if the doctor believed she was truly alive or just mimicking human behavior. Caldwell answered that the girl was truly alive. Melanie then said, "So why should we die to save you?" and ran out, leaving the doctor behind in the lab. Caldwell chased after her, holding a flashlight, but without any gun or weapon for protection. She was quickly surrounded by the zombie children. Meanwhile, Melanie went to the giant fungus they had found earlier and set it on fire, triggering the release of spores. Unfortunately, Parks had followed her and was infected by the fungus. Melanie hadn't intended for that to happen. As Parks began to transform, he asked her to shoot him before he became one of them. Later, Justino woke up in the lab, protected from the spores, and realized what had happened. Melanie was waiting for her outside the lab. In the final moments of the film, some time had passed, and Justino was awakened by Melanie. She brought out a whiteboard and began teaching the zombie children, who were listening to her from the other side of the lab window. Melanie had now become their leader, and they all participated in Miss Justino's lessons. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you can watch more videos like this. Thanks for watching!